Hey, this is Joshua from the church at Mon River. Thanks for taking time to listen to this teaching. We have one purpose here, and that is to make followers of Jesus. And we hope that this recording helps accomplish this purpose in your life.
2 Samuel chapter 9, starting in verse 1. David asked, "Is there anyone remaining from the family of Saul I can show kindness to for Jonathan's sake?" There was a servant of Saul's family named Ziba. They summoned him to David, and the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" "I am your servant," he replied. So the king asked, "Is there anyone left of Saul's family that I can show the kindness of God to?" Ziba said to the king, "There is still Jonathan's son who is injured in both feet." The king asked him, "Where is he?" Ziba answered the king, "You'll find him in Lo-debar at the house of Machir, son of Ammiel." So King David had him brought from the house of Machir, son of Ammiel, in Lo-debar. Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David, fell face down, and paid homage. David said, "Mephibosheth, I'm your servant," he replied. "Don't be afraid," David said to him, "since I intended to show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all your grandfather Saul's fields, and you will always eat meals at my table." Mephibosheth paid homage and said, "What is your servant that you take an interest in a dead dog like me?" Then the king summoned Saul's attendant Ziba and said to him, "I have given to your master's grandson all that belonged to Saul and his family. You, your sons, and your servants are to work the grounds for him, and you are to bring in the crops, so your master's grandson will have food to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, is always to eat at my table." Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Ziba said to the king, "Your servant will do all my lord the king commands." So Mephibosheth ate at David's table just like the other king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah. All those in Ziba's house were Mephibosheth's servants. However, Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table. His feet had been injured. Church, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Well, we are going through a study of the life of King David, and we find ourselves here now in 2 Samuel chapter 9. Last Sunday, our family was invited to have dinner with the Graham family. For all of you in the church, you know Kalima, and for many of you, you've probably met her parents, Doug and Lisa. They've been visiting with us over the last several weeks, and they treated us really well at this dinner. They served us some really yummy ribeye steak. They also had this Syrian eggplant dip as an appetizer that I surprisingly liked really well. I'm usually pretty picky with things like that, but it was really good. We also really enjoyed getting to know their family, having conversations with Doug and Lisa. We got to have dinner with 6 of their 8 children that they have. Also there joining us was Kalima's 97-year-old grandma. And they were all very welcoming to us. We had a great time. The kids had a fun time playing with their kids. But as we were driving home from their house there in Highland Park, the thing that made the biggest impression to me from the time that we spent with them was not the food. It was not the conversation that we had. It wasn't the volume of people in their house with their large family and our family. Rather, the thing that made the biggest impression on me was this 5-year-old neighbor boy named Judah. This boy who didn't even belong there. Lisa and Doug, they shared with me that Judah has lived next door to them now for a little bit. His mom is a single mom. And Judah comes over to their house most days, hangs out with their family. I saw at one point that little Judah was getting so rowdy playing with my boys that Lisa asked him to leave. She had him say goodbye to everyone, and then she took Judah to his house next door. But it wasn't 10 minutes later that Judah was sitting next to me at the dinner table. And I watched Lisa prepare his food. I saw her correct his manners. Saw her make him stay at the table until he had one more bite of his burger and finished off his potatoes. Saw her pick him up and embrace him when he got hurt and was crying. One point in the night, Judah got overheated from wrestling with my boys, and I saw Lisa clean up his vomit off the floor. I didn't ask Lisa this, but you have to wonder why. She has 8 kids of her own. It's not like she needs another kid to look after. Judah's not her relative, that she would have some obligation to care for him. It's not even like he's an easy kid to care for. Lisa didn't tell me this, but I think I know why Doug and Lisa look after little Judah. I think they have the same internal motivation that I do when I saw him. I'm driving home and telling Angela, you know what, I think we need a little Judah in our life. In the story that we're going to look at today here in 2 Samuel chapter 9, we'll see that David is the king and he has his own Judah. Someone who he shows undeserving kindness to. We'll say that he had even more reasons to not show kindness to Judah than Lisa and Doug do for their neighbor. But despite all of this, we see that the king shows undeserved kindness to the overlooked and despised. The king shows undeserved kindness to the overlooked and despised. Today, we'll consider why David acts in this way. We'll see how this is similar to Jesus' actions, and we'll think about how we should do the same in our own lives. Well, early in this study of the life of King David, we saw this ongoing tension between David and the current king at the time, King Saul. Saul had hunted David down and him and his soldiers for decades. After some time, King Saul and his 3 sons, they were actually killed in battle against the Philistines. And Saul's son, King Ishbosheth, as we looked at one day, he was crowned king. In chapter 4, we looked at how he was assassinated by 2 of his servants. This created a void in leadership, and David was crowned king over all of Israel. And over the last few weeks, we've been looking at how David has been establishing his kingdom there in Jerusalem. And here in chapter 9, he calls his servants together, and he asks if any of Saul's descendants were still alive. And someone speaks up. They're like, well, I don't know of any of Saul's descendants, but I know of this guy named Ziba. He's one of Saul's servants, and he's still alive. If anyone would know if Saul's descendants are still around, this guy would surely know. So David calls Ziba to his throne, and he asks him if he knew of any of Saul's descendants. He says, yeah, I know of one. He's the son of Jonathan. His name is Mephibosheth. Got to have some grace for Angela there, and this word Mephibosheth. It's very difficult to pronounce, especially saying it over and over. Something I've been practicing all week. I hope I get it right as I teach in this lesson. We didn't talk about this, but back in chapter 4 is where we first see Mephibosheth first discussed. You saw there that King Saul and his sons, when they were killed in that battle with the Philistines, that back in the capital city, that his family fled for their lives. They were afraid of the Philistines. And in that moment, the royal nanny, she picks up young Mephibosheth, and she goes to run with him. But in the chaos of fleeing, she dropped this young boy. And it says that both of his feet broke. As a result, he was crippled for the rest of his life. I'm guessing this nanny was probably looking for a new job after dropping the prince. And these circumstances that happened, they were a double strike against Mephibosheth. One, he would have been overlooked. He's crippled. This was an agricultural society. Things like strength were highly valued. His disability would have made him unable to provide for himself. It's likely that he was completely dependent upon the generosity of others. Just think forward to the New Testament when you see those who are lame sitting at the gate of the city as beggars. In addition to this, the law of Moses said that those who were lame were ceremonially unclean. They weren't allowed to enter the temple for worship. As a result of his disability, Mephibosheth would have been at the very bottom of their society. Not only that, he would have been the most despised in their society. His grandfather hunted David for years. And now David is king. And the very natural thing for David to do is to eliminate all the descendants of Saul. This was common in their culture. One, in an act of revenge, but two, in a way to secure their own throne. Eliminate all the descendants so that no one can later seek revenge on you and gain back the throne. Mephibosheth, he acknowledges this danger here in chapter 9. He later says that his entire family deserves death because Saul was his grandfather. Now David calls for Mephibosheth to come before his throne. The way that this chapter talks about his disability over and over, I can just imagine that he either slowly made his way to the throne, limping with a cane, or someone would have had to have carried him to the throne. It says that when he gets before David, he falls down on his face in fear. Surely he would have thought that this is the end for him as an overlooked and despised man. That's not what David had in mind at all. This is what David says. Don't be afraid, since I intend to show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all your grandfather Saul's fields, and you will always eat meals at my table. Then he orders Ziba, this servant of Saul, to tend to the fields that David gave to Mephibosheth, and to use the money from these fields to take care of all of Mephibosheth's needs. But Mephibosheth was to live in the palace and to dine with the king. Just think about this. This man hobbles into David's presence thinking that this is the end. The king's going to cut off his head. But instead of David treating him in the way that he thought he would, he shows him undeserved kindness. He gives him fields. He gives him servants. He gives him a seat of honor. Now, why would David act in this way? So because Mephibosheth deserved it? No. In fact, Mephibosheth acknowledges just how unworthy he is. He makes this statement. He says, "What is your servant that you take interest in a dead dog like me?" So it'd be like us saying that, what are you to show me kindness to roadkill like me? So why would David show him this kindness? Maybe it's because David had some ulterior motives. You know, if I show this kindness to Mephibosheth, maybe he'll return the favor to me one day when I'm in a position to need him. No. This crippled man had nothing to offer. He couldn't even take care of himself, much less do something in return for the king. David tells us why he acts in this way. and has absolutely nothing to do with Mephibosheth at all. It says that he's showing loving kindness to him for the sake of Jonathan, Mephibosheth's father. See, David and Saul's son Jonathan, they were childhood friends. And Jonathan protected David from his angry father. Talked about this before, how he saved his life. David was very grieved when Jonathan died in battle alongside of his father Saul. And just last week, we talked about how God made this incredible promise to David. Promise to bless him and to bless his family and his kingdom. And now that David had received this undeserved favor from God himself, he wants to share some of the blessing with Jonathan's son. David paid absolutely no attention to the fact that this young man was crippled and that he was a threat. Instead, David showed undeserved kindness to Mephibosheth because he was related to Jonathan. In acting this way, David is known as a man after God's own heart. And this theme of showing undeserved kindness defined Jesus Christ. When Jesus first begins his ministry, he does so by assembling a ministry team. Who does Jesus choose? Those who were the religiously trained, those who knew the Bible inside and out and maybe could bring some immediate value to his ministry. Who does Jesus choose? Those who were the elite class in their society? Those who could fund his ministry and get him in front of the right people? No. What does Jesus do? He goes to Nazareth, that town that the religious elite class would later say, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" He goes there and he calls the blue-collar fishermen. Blue-collar fishermen with a lot of character flaws. Calls a tax collector who everyone despised because he extorted them. Just imagine you're in the workplace and your boss comes to you and he assigns to you a really big project. He tells you, hey, you can have anyone in the company to help you work on this project. You're like, oh yeah, I know who I'm going to use. Give me the janitor. Give me the security guard at the front door. Give me that lazy peer who everyone else hates. And this is what Jesus does. He invested in these despised and overlooked people for 3 years, and he used them to start his church. When Jesus began doing ministry, he also targeted his ministry to the overlooked and despised people. This is what's written in Matthew chapter 9. It says this, "And Jesus continued going around to all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and every sickness. And when he saw the crowds, he felt compassion for them because they were distressed and dejected, like sheep without a shepherd." To the lepers, those who had this highly infectious disease that there was no cure for, the ones that everyone else in the city would walk on the other side of the road when they saw them coming, Jesus would touch them and heal them. To morally corrupt people, the drunkards, the prostitutes, those who have been divorced multiple times, those that everyone else in the city would judge and condemn, Jesus would invite himself to have dinner with them at their house. To the little children who were loud, simple-minded, had some snotty noses. Those who Jesus' disciples saw as a hindrance to his ministry, goes to shoo them away. Jesus says, no. My kingdom belongs to such as these. He took those children in his arms and he blessed them. And why did Jesus do this? It says because he had compassion on them. He saw their physical needs and their spiritual needs, and he met these needs with undeserved kindness. But listen, friend, it's not just the overlooked and despised in the first century Judea who Jesus showed this kind of kindness to. He also shows us undeserved kindness. He welcomes people like you and me to his table in his kingdom. I love this verse in Ephesians. It says, "But God, who is rich in mercy, because of his great love that he has for us, he made us alive with Christ, even though we were dead in our trespasses." We are like the roadkill, the dead dogs. The Bible says that we are dead in our sins. And it's not just general sins, but direct rebellion to God, the King. And as a result of this, we deserve nothing else but to be beheaded for our actions. But this passage continues. But you are saved by grace, undeserved kindness. It says he also raised us up with him, and he has seated us with him in the heavens in Christ Jesus, so that in the coming ages he might display the immeasurable riches of his grace through his kindness to us in Christ Jesus. If you are in Jesus, if you trust in his death and resurrection, well, you are made alive with him. God pays no attention to your faults or your failures. Instead, he shows undeserved kindness to us only because of our relation to Jesus. And there's absolutely nothing you can do to earn this kindness. Here in a second, we're going to sing a song, and it says this: all the fitness he requires is to fill your need of him. If you think that you are good, that you have it all together, well, that's when you're like the Pharisees, those who are the religiously trained, the socially elite. And it is those who he rejects. But when we bow before the King, when we recognize our lack of worth, our unworthiness, well, that is the very moment that he gives you worth, that he lifts your head and honors you with a seat at his table. It's this irony. When we elevate ourselves, well, then he will humble us. But when we humble ourselves before him, well, then he will lift us up. And so let us think about our response to these things in our own lives. Some of you may have seen me post this on Facebook this week, but my son Judson in the kids' class right now, he's began telling me and Angela, he'll say, "Daddy, I love you mucho." This morning, may the King's kindness cause you to love him mucho. There's this scene that we see in the Bible where Jesus is having dinner at a Pharisee's house. There's a woman there who is overcome by her affection for Jesus. It says that she begins to wash Jesus' dirty feet with her tears. She takes her long hair and begins to wipe away the dirt with her hair. She pours expensive perfume on Jesus' feet. And the Pharisee there in the room, he's like, Jesus, if you knew what kind of wrong this woman had done, you wouldn't let her be touching you like that. Jesus, he tells this story. He says there's two people who owe money to a bank. There's one who owes $250, and there's another who owes $12,000. And both of these people, they lose their job and they're not able to repay their money to the bank, but the bank forgives them both of their loans. And Jesus asked this question. He says, which of these two people would be most grateful? Well, it's obvious to the Pharisee. He says, the one who was forgiven more. And Jesus calls out the Pharisee in this moment. He says, I came to your house, and you didn't give me water to wash my feet. This woman has washed my feet with her tears and her hair. He says, you gave me no kiss to greet me. She hasn't stopped kissing my feet. He says, you didn't even anoint my head with cheap oil, and she's poured expensive perfume on my feet. Jesus summarizes this story with this. He says, the one who is forgiven much loves much. Just think about Mephibosheth. He's having dinner with King David. He's a beggar who can't even walk to the dinner table on his own. He's sitting at this table with the who's who of Israel. He's eating steak and lobster. Who would give more gratitude to the king with each bite that they ate? The generals and the leaders who had earned their spot at the table? This young, crippled man. For some of you, you weren't the brightest in your class. You weren't the most impressive on the ball field. You weren't the most naturally gifted in the workplace. For some of you, you are the great sinners. The ones with the sketchy past. Ones who others here in this room might not be so friendly towards if they knew all the things that you've done. For all of us, we are the ones who deserve to have the King of Kings pass judgment on us. But listen, friend, I don't tell you these things this morning so that you would think worse of yourself, to be reminded of just how much of a screw-up you are. I tell you these things so that you would think more of the King and his undeserved kindness to you. May your heart be stirred this morning in humility, but also great affection and great worship. May you love Jesus more than anyone else in this room this morning. May the King's kindness cause you to love him mucho. May the King's kindness also cause you to love others mucho. David was just a simple shepherd. Yet God had decided to anoint him as king out of all the men in Israel. And after decades, David finally sees God's promise become reality. He is the most powerful and wealthy man in all of the land. And what is the very first thing that he does? He shows loving kindness to Mephibosheth. He blesses this crippled man with land and servants and a seat of honor. Not because Mephibosheth is deserving, but because of Jonathan's kindness to him. For every one of us in this room, we have been blessed. For all that are followers of Jesus, we've been blessed with forgiveness and mercy. We've also been blessed with a house, good paying jobs, physical abilities. And these two are God's undeserved kindness upon us. And his grace towards us, it should just naturally stir us to show undeserved kindness to the Mephibosheths in our own lives. There's a report that I read this week. It said that followers of Jesus are 2 times more likely to foster and adopt than the general public is. It went on to say that they're also more likely to take in sibling groups and older teens that are more likely to be unwanted, more likely to take in children with special needs. Just think about that. I didn't talk to Lisa Graham about this, but I'm pretty confident that if I was to ask her why she looked after little Judah, that she would say that it's in response to her faith in Jesus. This morning, I want you to consider, who are the overlooked and despised in your life? Who are the overlooked and despised in our neighborhood, in your workplace, across our city? For us at the church at Mon River, it's one of our core values is compassion. We define compassion in this way. We pursue overlooked individuals in our neighborhoods so they can also experience God's design. And church, as the pastor, I am so proud of the people in this room living out this value. Loving on the homeless in our community through ministries like Light of Life. Loving on foreigners in our city. This past Friday night, many of you came out or brought food to serve international students through the Prism ministry. Proud of people in our church serving children through Greenfield Baseball Association. Some of these kids that are hard to love. Many of you are loving on the elderly among us, giving them rides and meals. In addition to all this, there's so many unseen acts of generosity towards the Mephibosheths in our lives. But I want to press us this morning as a church. How can we build on this value even more? Not motivated by a desire to earn favor with God, but because of the kindness that he's first shown us. We go and love others also. Church at Mon River, may we be a people that loves him much and loves others much as well.